Imagine an autumn afternoon in Boston when the last light of day slips through glass windows, bathing the restless streets in gold. And somewhere in that city that never truly sleeps, a young woman sits quietly by a cup of tea, believing herself to be no more than a nameless fragment in a vast, unfeeling canvas. She doesn't know yet that this ordinary moment will open the door to the most beautiful and most dangerous love of her life. A love that could shelter her or destroy everything she holds dear. The late autumn light spilled through the tall windows of Willow and Birch Cafe, stretching long golden fingers across the worn wooden floor, polished smooth by generations of familiar footsteps. I took my usual seat in the corner and ordered a cup of hot lavender tea. It had become an unspoken ritual every Friday, a quiet reward after long hours spent among the faded manuscripts and dust-scented shelves of the Boston City Library. The ink-stained relics of forgotten worlds consumed my days. This place with its roasted coffee and soft jazz was my sanctuary. Porcelain cups clinked gently, voices murmured low, and a saxophone whispered through the speakers like a memory of another time. In a city that could feel so vast and cold, this cafe was where I almost believed I belonged. At 26, I had grown accustomed to the stillness of my life. I found peace in the smallest moments. A page turned a sip of tea, sunlight caught on glass. My name is Clara Bennett. Since the accident that took my parents 3 years ago, leaving me to see my younger sister through college, fiction had become my truest companion. Stories never left you. They didn't forget to come home. That afternoon, I was recording a message for my sister, telling her the scholarship application we'd sent last week was under review. I spoke of hope of small weekend plans. But as my voice lingered in the recording, the door opened, and 2 men walked in, stilling the air around them. The first moved as though the room itself belonged to him. Tall tailored every line of his suit precise. A charcoal tie. Eyes the color of storm-washed green glass, sharp enough to read the air. The second was younger, sharing the same dark hair, the same angular frame, but lacking his composure. He carried a restless energy, as though constantly searching for proof of his own worth. They crossed to a corner table where a man in his 50s waited. His palms were slick against the surface, though the cafe's warmth was gentle. Something old and instinctive, the curiosity I'd buried since journalism school, stirred awake. I caught fragments of his trembling words. Judge Morrison has agreed. The construction contract will be approved Monday, and the environmental report will come back clean. Marcus, that name, Marcus, hit me like a drop of ice. I'd heard it before, murmured in newsrooms and whispered in reports about generous donations that hid darker motives. I should have turned away, finished my message about deadlines and scholarships. But instead, I leaned forward, gripping my phone tighter, the recorder still running. Marcus's voice, deep and smooth, like aged whiskey, filled the space. The Federal Oversight Committee will be looking elsewhere. Senator Wallace has arranged it. Your investments on the riverside are fully protected. Then, with chilling calm, as for the witness in the protection program, she's due in court next month. We can't let that happen. The blood in my veins froze solid. They weren't just talking about contracts. They were talking about a life. My phone kept recording, every syllable, every detail, as if signing a blood pact between strangers. Marcus turned to the younger man. Ethan will handle it, cleanly, no traces. Ethan's eyes gleamed too bright, too eager. It'll look like an accident, a car failure on the highway, or a gas leak in her safe house. I pressed the phone against my chest, praying it would stay silent while my heartbeat thundered loud enough to betray me. The older man added, "First quarter profits will hit 40 million. Your share as agreed will go through the Caribbean account. If anyone asks other contractors had licensing issues, bureaucratic delays." I wanted to erase everything to pretend none of it existed. But my sister's face appeared in my mind, hopeful, trusting, and I couldn't. The screen showed 12 minutes of recording when movement caught my eye. Ethan was staring at me. His expression darkened. "We have a problem," he said quietly. But every man at that table heard him. 3 pairs of eyes turned my way. Marcus's gaze was heavy, tangible, a force pressing against my skin. Up close, he was even more dangerous. Chiseled cheekbones, a jaw carved in defiance, eyes that saw straight through the lies I told myself. Ethan pointed toward me. The brunette in the corner, she heard everything, and I'm pretty sure she's recording. The atmosphere shifted. The other patrons must have sensed it too. They gathered their things and slipped out one by one. Marcus's voice came smooth as silk, soft as a command disguised as kindness. "Would you come over here for a moment?" It wasn't a question, and everyone knew it. I stopped the recording, shoved the phone into my coat pocket, trying to summon calm while every nerve screamed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." I stammered, my knees trembling as I rose. "I was just recording a message for my sister about her college forms." Ethan laughed, a dry, humorless sound that turned my stomach. 12 minutes, about a college application." The younger man's voice sliced through the air, half amusement, half blade. As I stumbled closer to their table, my heart beat so wildly it felt like a warning drum urging me to turn and run. The older man, the one who radiated power without needing to say a word, gestured toward the empty chair across from him. The motion was elegant, polite. Even yet, his eyes carried a quiet threat far sharper than any shouted command. Up close, I saw everything: the fine scar cutting across his left eyebrow, like a thin line of ink, the gleam of silver rings on his fingers, the poised way he angled his body to keep both me and the cafe door within view. This was a man who missed nothing. "Clara Bennett." He spoke my name, and something inside me turned to stone. He knew who I was, my age, my job at the city library, that I was the legal guardian of Lily, my younger sister, the scholarship student with dreams too big for our small lives. He recited these things like he was reading aloud from a confidential file, stripping me bare of privacy, of safety, of the illusion that my quiet life could protect me. "Sit down," he said softly, the gentleness deceitful. "We need to talk about what you think you heard." And somehow, moments later, I was in a glass elevator, the hum of its motor carrying me upward through marble and silence. I didn't speak. I stood between two men built like walls, while Ethan, the younger one, radiated a heat so restless it could burn through air. Every step I took reminded me I was a sparrow, lost in the kingdom of hawks. When the doors opened, the world changed. The corridor gleamed with polished stone. Crystal chandeliers scattered fragments of light across oil paintings worth more than a decade of my rent. His office stretched wide and bright, its glass walls framing Boston below, like a map of a city I no longer recognized. Everything here was designed to make him feel powerful, and to make anyone facing him feel small. He gestured to the chair across his walnut desk and smiled, all civility and control. "Please." I sat trembling beneath the weight of his gaze. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee, water? Something stronger?" I'm fine, thank you." My throat was dry, my voice rough, as if I'd swallowed sand. Somehow, his politeness terrified me more than open menace ever could. He leaned back, those green eyes studying me, like a magnifying glass over paper, searching for what lay between the lines. "Let's talk about the cafe, Miss Bennett. I'm curious to hear your version." I wasn't paying attention," I stammered, tripping over the lie before it left my tongue. "I was just recording a message from my sister, about her scholarship." Ethan gave a short, sharp laugh and moved to the window. 12 minutes on scholarships. Really. Patience, Ethan. The man's tone stayed smooth, but the air chilled with every word. "Miss Bennett is smart enough to understand how fragile her situation is. Isn't that right?" The way he lingered on my name sent a shiver racing down my spine. How long had he known about me? How deep did his reach go? My greatest fear was no longer for myself, but for Lily. Whether his name might soon find its way into her peaceful dreams. I only heard bits and pieces, I managed to say, voice barely holding. People talking about contracts, politics. I didn't understand any of it. "But you recorded it." He tilted his head, eyes bright with precision. "That's not what people do by accident." My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. "I started recording earlier. I didn't mean to. Give me the phone." His words were soft, final. My instinct screamed no. My reason whispered, "There's no other way." With trembling hands, I pulled the phone from my pocket, opened the recording app. There it was, 12 minutes and 37 seconds of danger. He took the phone and pressed play. His own voice filled the room, speaking of bribes, of contracts, of silenced witnesses, as calmly as if discussing quarterly profits. When Ethan's voice followed, describing how to turn death into accident, I searched Marcus's face for even a flicker of regret. There was none, only composure. "Quite detailed," he murmured when the recording ended. "This information would be extremely valuable to some and extremely dangerous to others." "I don't want any part of it," I blurted. "I'll delete it. I'll forget everything, like it never happened." He shook his head slowly, eyes locked on mine. "Knowledge doesn't work that way, Miss Bennett. Once you know, you can't be innocent again." Ethan moved closer, his breath searing the air behind my neck. She heard everything: names, plans, details. "We can't let her go." Marcus didn't look away. "No," he said quietly. "We can't." The light seemed to drain from the room. I sat frozen, thinking of Lily, of her laughter, her textbooks, her dream of becoming a doctor. Just hours ago, those worries about tuition and grades had felt enormous. Now they were nothing but dust at the edge of a cliff. But Marcus leaned forward, his voice softening to something far more terrifying than threat. "I believe Miss Bennett is a reasonable woman, and that she understands cooperation is far more rewarding than defiance." The word cooperation landed like a key turning in a lock, one that would never open outward again. And in that moment, I knew whatever choice I made next, my life would never be the same. "How exactly do you expect me to cooperate?" I asked, surprised that my voice sounded calm when every nerve inside me trembled like a string pulled too tight. The man across from me, with that thin scar tracing his left brow and those green eyes that seemed to read straight through my soul, smiled. For the first time, the smile reached his eyes, and that made it even more terrifying. "I'm going to give you an opportunity," he said, his tone smooth, almost inviting. "Think of it as consultancy work, $50,000 a year, deposited monthly directly into your account." The number hung in the air, dizzying. 50,000, more than I earned at the library, enough to pay off Lily's remaining tuition and free us from the endless, exhausting loop of debt. But every dollar of it would be steeped in shadow. And if I refuse, I asked, though I already knew the answer from the look in his eyes. "Then you become a liability," he replied gently, as if discussing dinner plans. "And I don't allow liabilities to threaten my family." The threat wrapped in silk froze my blood more effectively than any scream could. "I need that recording deleted immediately," Marcus continued, "and your word that you'll never contact the police. In return, you'll have financial security." His gaze sharpened. "And my protection, for you and your sister." The next 2 weeks passed like a haze, days caught between false calm and the quiet pulse of fear. The 50,000 appeared in a new account, alongside a contract neatly titled Cultural Consultant Moretti Corporation. The money untangled nearly every knot in my life. Lily's tuition paid, the rent up to date, the sleepless nights briefly soothed by numbers glowing in my bank app. But peace never came, not truly. I lived like someone walking a tightrope across a canyon, balanced, breathless, never safe. One Tuesday afternoon, as I sat cataloging medieval manuscripts in the library's archive room, a woman appeared at my desk. She was blonde, mid-30s, wearing a tailored navy suit, far too sharp for the quiet dust of academia. "Clara Bennett," she asked, flashing a badge that made my stomach plummet. "Agent Sarah Reynolds, FBI, Financial Crimes Division." The air thickened instantly. She sat opposite me, her ice blue eyes scanning me with a precision I had once seen before. Marcus. "We're investigating some irregularities in your accounts," Sarah said, spreading out a stack of papers like playing cards between us. "Large deposits inconsistent with your salary, routed through a shell corporation with a rather interesting owner." My throat turned to sand as understanding dawned. They had found me. The FBI had followed the thread that tied me to Marcus's world. What had once seemed like a lifeline now felt like a noose. I do freelance consulting," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Cultural research, private clients, 50,000 a year." Sarah's smile was cold as winter wind. "Ms. Bennett, we both know that's not the full truth. The question is, will you help us build a case against Marcus Moretti, or become part of it as a defendant?" The next month was a performance on a fraying wire. The FBI pressed harder, waving threats of conspiracy charges. Marcus remained calm, his money arriving each month like clockwork. I was trapped between two worlds, neither offering mercy. Our meetings grew more frequent, and somewhere between the tension and the silence, I began to study him, searching for the monster Sarah had described. But instead, I saw something else. At a community event sponsored by his corporation, I watched Marcus personally oversee the heating repairs in Boston's Little Italy. He knew everyone's name, asked after their grandchildren, spoke fluent Italian that made them laugh and bless him in the same breath. When he caught my bewildered gaze, he arched an eyebrow. Surprised. You expected horns and a pitchfork. I expected someone less. I hesitated, searching for the word. Less human. He laughed. Genuinely this time. No bitterness, no artifice. People are complicated, Miss Bennett. We're rarely just good or bad, no matter how much the police want you to believe otherwise. I blurted out before I could stop myself. What about Agent Martinez? How do you justify planning her death? His expression hardened, though he didn't deny it. She betrayed the people who trusted her. Choices have consequences. So does obedience, I said, quietly surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. At what point does loyalty become complicity? He turned fully toward me, then eyes deep as glass-green seas, unblinking. You're either very brave or very foolish to challenge me like that. Maybe both, I exhaled. But if I'm working for you, shouldn't I at least know what I'm tied to? Something flickered behind his gaze. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. Most people in your position would take the money and stay silent. No questions asked. I'm not most people. No, he murmured, his voice dropping to something unreadable. You're not like them at all. Our conversation had just softened into a fragile silence when the door opened and Ethan and Elena entered, two names that seemed to arrive before they did. Ethan carried the same restless fury he'd been holding back for weeks. Elena moved with the composure of silk-wrapped steel. They looked at me as though they'd come bearing a verdict. Marcus, Ethan said bluntly, we need to talk about Clara. She's becoming a liability. Marcus's reply was calm, but there was warning in it. She hasn't caused trouble. Ethan snapped. First it was the recording, then the FBI. How long before she decides working with them is safer than staying quiet? Elena stepped forward, her voice steady and clinical, like reading from a report. There's bad news, Marcus. Financial records show Agent Reynolds is monitoring the deposits into Clara's account. The word struck like a slap to the chest. That's not true. I began quickly, but Elena continued unbothered. Pressure from law enforcement is understandable. People in her situation usually choose self-preservation over loyalty to strangers. Ethan's patience finally fractured. Marcus, your feelings for her are blinding you. She should have been dealt with 2 weeks ago. The air seemed to tighten around us, every breath a risk. Marcus looked straight at me before he spoke, his tone cool but unyielding. Clara is under my protection. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me directly. Something in those words, a heat disguised as command, slipped beneath my fear and rooted itself in the quietest corner of my heart. It wasn't legal safety that I felt. It was something more dangerous, the illusion of belonging. I told myself to smother it, to kill it before it grew, because affection in his world was a trap disguised as tenderness. That night, as I stepped out of my apartment, Agent Sarah Reynolds was waiting, an unshakable ghost cloaked in determination. Time's running out, Clara, she said flatly. We know about the donations, the scholarship funds the shell companies Moretti uses to disguise his money. I don't know much. I tried to sound calm. I'm just a cultural consultant. Reynolds shook her head, her voice clipped and sharp. Then get access, or prepare to be charged. The transactions from those shell companies into your account make you look like a willing accomplice. The word cooperate dropped between us like a door slamming shut. Full cooperation, she said, or face conspiracy charges. Enough to end your future before it starts. Her instructions were precise. Get close to him, record the meetings, photograph the files, gather what we need to prosecute, and if he finds out... She paused, letting the silence finish her sentence. You know what he's capable of. Marcus Moretti has ordered the deaths of more than one person in the past 2 years. The word feelings hovered unspoken between us, fragile as glass. You think whatever affection he has for you will save you if you're exposed? She asked. I couldn't answer, because I hadn't yet admitted it to myself. Marcus had protected me? Yes, but his world was built on violence, and in that world, love rarely survived the cost of survival. I need more time, I pleaded. Reynolds' answer was cold and simple. You have 1 week, then we move, with or without you. A week, just 7 days stretched thin between 2 cliffs. I returned home clutching my phone, the weight of Lily's future pressing heavier than ever. Marcus had shielded me from his own wolves. He'd shown me moments of unexpected gentleness in a life made of storms. But Reynolds was right. Violence wasn't the shadow in his world. It was the foundation. The next morning, a message from Marcus appeared on my phone. "Dinner tonight. We need to discuss your safety." The words were few, but they trembled through me like the strike of a match. I hadn't meant to care. I hadn't meant to fall. Yet here I was, drawn toward a man who could order a death as easily as he might pour a glass of wine. And standing on the other side of that impossible truth was Reynolds asking me to betray him, to save myself. The rope between the two choices frayed thinner each day, and I knew, when it finally snapped, the fall would not be small. Standing in Marcus's elegant dining room, I no longer knew what counted as a mistake. The chandelier cast a soft golden light over the table, draped in crisp white linen, over the crystal glasses filled with red wine that glowed like rubies over the walls lined with original art. Everything shimmered with a kind of impossible perfection, as though I'd stepped into the pages of a novel instead of a man's real life. And the man across from me, he didn't look at all like the monster Agent Reynolds had described. "You seem thoughtful tonight," Marcus observed, handing me a glass of wine, smooth as silk. "Is everything all right? How's Lily doing with her studies?" The mention of my sister's name should have made me tense. Instead, it warmed me. His concern didn't feel staged, it felt sincere. He remembered details I'd only mentioned in passing. Her struggle with organic chemistry, her late-night study habits. He'd even arranged quietly and without credit for her to receive a small anonymous scholarship that had lifted the last weight of tuition from our shoulders. "She's fine," I said, smiling despite myself. "Chemistry's tough, but she got an A-. Intelligence clearly runs in the family," he said, and for the first time that night, his smile reached his eyes. "She's lucky to have a sister who fights for her future." As we began our meal, perfectly cooked seafood risotto, the conversation flowed effortlessly. I was startled to discover how much Marcus knew about art, literature, and history, subjects I'd never imagined belonged in his world. He spoke about Renaissance poetry, with reverence quoted Dante in flawless Italian, then asked with boyish curiosity about my work cataloging medieval manuscripts. "You're not at all what I imagined when I first heard the name Marcus Moretti," I admitted as the main course arrived. Filet mignon glistening under soft light. "And what did you imagine?" he asked, cutting his steak with measured calm. "Someone less educated," I said softly. "Less human." His face darkened, his voice lowering. "My father believed that power without culture is just brutality. He made me study art philosophy. Anything that reminded me the world was once beautiful and could be again." "He sounds complicated." "He was," Marcus said, eyes fixed on his glass, watching the red swirl like thought. "I was 24 when he died." His heart stopped during a meeting. One moment, he was negotiating a contract, the next, I was the heir. There was a tremor beneath his calm. I could almost feel the grief he'd trained himself not to show. "That must have been unbearable," I whispered. "It was, but grief is a luxury people in my position can't afford for long. The organization needed a leader. Ethan was too young, too reckless. I had to step into a life I never chose." He gave a small, rueful smile. "Columbia once invited me to teach Italian literature. I was preparing for the new semester when my father died. Instead of teaching poetry, I learned to speak the language of power." And just like that, a different side of him unfolded. Not a man who had chosen violence, but one bound to it by legacy. "And what about you?" he asked, looking at me with an intensity that saw far too much. "Lily mentioned you once wanted to be a journalist." The way he mentioned my sister, so casually, so naturally, should have set off every alarm. But somehow it didn't. It felt familiar. I admitted. I wanted to expose corruption to make people in power pay for what they'd done. He smiled faintly. "And now you're sitting across from exactly that kind of person." I met his gaze without flinching, and finding that reality is much more complicated than I ever imagined. We talked until nearly midnight, about lost duty, the fragile threads of family that tethered us to hope. He spoke of the loneliness that came with leadership, of the need to maintain peace between ruthless factions. I told him about those first months after my parents died, when Lily's future hung by a thread, when a mysterious scholarship had arrived like a miracle, but left behind a stain of guilt. "You're stronger than you think," Marcus said, his voice softening. "Most people would have broken under that weight." "Most of us don't have the luxury of breaking," I replied. "There's always a choice, Clara," he said quietly. "The question is whether you have the courage to choose the harder one." When his driver came to take me home, Marcus walked me to the elevator. It was a simple gesture, polite, even ordinary, but it felt strangely intimate. "Thank you for dinner," I said, "and for listening. Thank you for trusting me with your story." He stepped closer, not threatening, but near enough that I could smell the subtle warmth of his cologne. "Clara," the way he said my name, low, rich like aged whiskey, sent a flush through my chest. The air thickened heavy with something I didn't dare name. "Good night," he murmured, stepping back before the moment could cross its fragile line. Across the city, Elena Vasquez closed her laptop and reached for her phone. The FBI dossier she had obtained through her private sources painted a far more dangerous picture. Clara Bennett was not just an accidental witness. She was being watched, closely, deliberately, by people who believed she might soon become an informant. And the photographs waiting in the file, sharp and undeniable, were ready to be used. The grainy photographs slipped from Elena's hand and scattered across the mahogany table. Under the glow of the crystal chandelier, each one caught the light like an accusation. And there I was, frozen in them, walking beside a blonde woman, a file clasped in my hands, my face serious. Sarah Reynolds. In that moment, I could feel the verdict forming before a single word was spoken. To everyone in the room, the images were already a sentence. Elena's voice, cool and precise, cut through the stillness like a scalpel. "Over the past 6 weeks, Miss Bennett has met with Agent Reynolds multiple times. These photographs don't require interpretation. They show her receiving instructions and documents from the FBI." Every gaze in the room turned toward me. 6 men who had once shared loyalty blood and secrets with Marcus, now looked at me with eyes full of doubt, fury, even contempt. My heartbeat thudded like a drum in an empty hall. "It's not what you think," I blurted, my voice trembling but resolute. "Reynolds followed me. She threatened me, cornered me. I never agreed to work with her. I never gave her anything." Elena raised an eyebrow, her expression soft, but her words sharp as glass. "According to our contacts inside the federal building, your name appears on a list of potential cooperating witnesses. The consulting payments you've received from us match the financial evidence they're building. It's very likely you've already been compromised." Ethan pushed himself away from the window, his footsteps echoing against the marble like the strike of a gavel. "Marcus, I warned you months ago. She's been playing both sides, taking our money while feeding the FBI." "No," I turned to Marcus, desperate for a glimmer of belief in his eyes. "I deleted the recording just as I promised. I kept my word. I've never betrayed you." Ethan threw one of the photographs across the table. It slid to a stop in front of me. "Then explain this. Why were you accepting documents from an investigator if you weren't working with her? Why do these photos exist?" The truth was more tangled than any of them could imagine. Reynolds had trapped me using fear like a weapon, threatening prosecution, twisting every transaction into a noose. I had refused her demands, but refusal didn't mean freedom. And saying any of that here now would only show them how easily I could break. "I was threatened," I said, quietly forcing the words past the lump in my throat. "She's been pressing me to cooperate. I've said no. I keep saying no. Staying silent is the only way I survive." Elena let out a small, poisonous laugh. "Refusal, Miss Bennett. That's an interesting choice of word. Documents, photographs, long conversations. If that's refusal, I'd hate to see what cooperation looks like." All the eyes in the room bore into me. And at the head of the table, Marcus remained silent. He turned the photographs one by one, as if examining rare pages from a lost manuscript. The green of his eyes had darkened, and though his face betrayed nothing, something inside him was shifting, slowly, irrevocably. And in that instant, I realized something cold and true. I was no longer standing before his organization's judgment. I was standing before his, the man I had begun to see not as a criminal overlord, but as a person. A man who had known loss, who carried a kind of sadness that made his ruthlessness almost human. And now, the fragile thread of trust between us hung suspended, stretched so thin that one tug from Elena or Ethan could tear it apart. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice breaking around the edges, Please, believe me. But his eyes stayed fixed on the photographs, not on me. Was he looking at me or at the photographs? I couldn't tell. In those green eyes, sharp and unreadable, what did he see evidence stacking against me, or doubt that everything we'd built together had been nothing but a well-crafted lie? Look at me, Marcus, I said, stripping away the last trace of politeness. You know me. You've seen me care for Lily. You know how hard I've tried to build a life that meant something. Kindness. Ethan's laugh was cold, metallic. She's manipulating you, Marcus. That's what this is. The pleading, the softness. It's weakness. This organization doesn't survive on kindness. It survives on strength, on decisive action. And what kind of action would that be? I asked, though I already knew. Removing the threat before it destroys everything Ethan said. Smiling the way winter might, if it could. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They were discussing my death with the same calm as if they were reviewing a contract. I thought of Lily, of the scholarship that would vanish if I disappeared, of the dreams that would crumble simply because I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're talking about killing an innocent person based on a few photos that prove nothing, I said, astonished that my voice didn't shake. I kept my word. I betrayed no one. I gave nothing to the police. Your denial means nothing. Ethan snapped, his anger igniting like dry tinder. Every day you argue for her, the FBI builds their case. She has to disappear before she can testify. I'm not testifying to anything, I said firmly. That recording was deleted months ago. I have no evidence, no documents, nothing that could harm this organization. Enough! Ethan slammed his hand onto the table. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. She's lying! Marcus, your feelings are making you blind. She'll destroy everything our father built. He moved around the table, his steps thunderous, his energy coiled like a predator's. Since you won't deal with her properly, he hissed, I will. Wandavik, Inderfindes. Ethan, stop! Marcus's voice sliced through the tension, cold and commanding. No. Ethan kept advancing, his arm outstretched. This ends now. Stop! Marcus repeated, rising to his feet. His voice was low, sharp enough to cut. Ethan didn't listen. His hand clamped around my wrist, yanking me forward. You've been lying to him for months. Taking our money, feeding the FBI? That's not true. I fought to pull away. Shut up! He roared, his face inches from mine, his breath hot with rage. You've been nothing but trouble since the day you stepped into our world. A burden we can't afford. I opened my mouth to say that I had refused Reynolds, that I'd chosen to protect Marcus. But Ethan's hand rose, and the slap landed hard against my cheek. The sound cracked through the air like the shot of a pistol. Then, silence. So silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Touch her again, and you die. Marcus's voice erupted through the room, his fury a storm breaking open the sky. In 3 strides he was between us, his hand around Ethan's throat, lifting him from the floor as though he weighed nothing. She is under my protection, he said, his tone low and deadly calm, far more terrifying than a shout. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me. 6 stunned faces watched as he held his brother, suspended the hierarchy of power, suddenly rewritten before their eyes. This wasn't just an act of defense, it was a declaration. Ethan choked his hands, clawing at Marcus's wrist, but Marcus held on a moment longer, then released him with a look of contempt. Clara belongs to me, he said, his voice steady, resonant. That means she is family, and family is protected, above all else. When the meeting room doors finally closed on the chaos, the penthouse seemed to exhale. My cheek burned with each heartbeat, but the pain felt distant, blurred by the storm of what had just happened. He had declared me family, in front of them all, and that word, family, was spreading through me like ink dropped into water, blooming slow and dark. Let me see, Marcus said gently, guiding me into the marble-lit bathroom where soft daylight streamed through tall glass windows. His fingers brushed my skin, tracing the swelling on my cheek. The touch was so tender, it stole the breath from my lungs. Not too bad, I whispered, though my voice wavered more than I wanted. Bad enough, he replied, his jaw tightening. Ethan crossed a line he can't come back from. He laid a hand on you. That demands consequence. He retrieved a first aid kit from beneath the marble counter, his movements practiced but filled with a kind of careful devotion. When the cold compress touched my skin, I flinched, but his presence steadied me. So close I could see the tension in his shoulders, the control in every breath. "Thank you," I murmured, "for protecting me." He met my eyes in the mirror. For what he asked softly, though, he already knew. For making me feel like I belonged somewhere. Something shifted in his expression. Something unguarded, dangerous. The wall we'd both built between us trembled, then fell. His hand slipped from the compress to my jaw, fingers warm against my skin, lifting my face gently until I was looking straight at him. His thumb traced tiny circles along my jawline, as if memorizing every contour, every breath. "Clara." He whispered my name on his lips, becoming something heavy and precious. A declaration woven with both possession and protection. "You must understand what it means in my world to declare someone family. It means you belong to me, to be guarded, to be cared for." "To belong to you," I interrupted softly. The word belong hung between us like a bridge no one dared cross alone. The kiss that followed was at once the dream I had secretly rehearsed, and a wave I had not seen coming. Marcus's mouth found mine, demanding yet restrained, like a man trying to hold back 5 years of pent yearning, while taking everything I was willing to give. My hand found the lapel of his jacket and pulled him closer until there was no space left between us. "Are you sure?" he breathed against my lips, offering one last chance to step back before we crossed a line that would change everything. Instead of answering, I kissed him again, pouring into that kiss the restrained months, the fear and the hunger that had grown into something I could no longer deny. He answered with the same immediacy, whole fierce. His arms circled me, lifting me as though I weighed nothing, carrying me toward the bedroom. The afternoon dissolved into sensation and discovery. He treated my body as if each skin and breath mattered, learning what made me tremble, what made me bend toward him, what transformed the careful librarian into a woman who matched his intensity. When he finally claimed me, it felt like coming home to a place I hadn't known existed. We lay tangled beneath Egyptian cotton sheets. My head rested on Marcus's chest as his fingers lazily traced spirals along my shoulder. The intimacy felt so natural that every argument about danger blurred at the edges. "So, what now?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "Now you truly belong to me," he said, voice threaded with both satisfaction and ownership. "Anyone who threatens you threatens me." Today Ethan learned that lesson. "And Elena," I murmured, "she set all this in motion, didn't she? The photographs, the timing of the accusations. Everything seemed calculated to drive us into conflict." Marcus was silent for a long time before he answered. "You're perceptive. Elena has been with me 5 years. I trust her, rely on her legal skills. The idea that she'd manipulate evidence to remove you..." He stopped, his gaze distant. "Jealousy makes people do desperate things." Across the city, Elena Vasquez stared at the photos spread across her dining table. They showed Clara entering Marcus's building, but, crucially, not leaving. Hours had passed since the showdown in the boardroom. Hours Marcus was likely consoling the little librarian in the most intimate ways. Ethan's humiliation had satisfied her hunger for dominance, but it also meant Elena needed a new plan. A plan to remove Clara forever and carve out the place she believed she deserved beside Marcus. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victor: "Emergency meeting tonight. Need to discuss next steps." Elena smiled as she typed a reply. Marcus might be soft for Clara, but that softness could be her knife. She began calling allies within the organization. The men tired of Marcus's cautious style, the ones who believed family needed a leader willing to make cruel choices. In the FBI office, Agent Sarah Reynolds peered at bank statements spread across her desk, hunting for the pattern that would give her the final leverage. 4 months of investigation had produced only conjecture and indirect evidence unfit for a federal courtroom. Then her phone rang. "Agent Reynolds, this is Agent Chen. We have an update on the Bennett subject." "What is it?" Reynolds asked, her heart in her throat. "She entered the Moretti building 3 hours ago and has not emerged. Directional mics picked up sounds suggesting intimate activity. If they're involved romantically, that's huge," Reynolds said, equal parts exhilarated and urgent. "Love makes people careless. Keep surveillance tight and record everything. I want photos, audio, anything that proves their relationship. If Marcus Moretti has fallen for our witness, we have the leverage we need." That night, as Marcus slept beside me, my phone slid from my hand to the floor. 23 missed calls from Detective Reynolds lit the screen. her messages growing more insistent. "We know about your relationship with Moretti. Everything's changed. Contact us now or face consequences." But an anonymous email an hour earlier had chilled me more than any number of calls. The sender unknown, the message clear. "Marcus's weakness for you will destroy all he has built. Some of us will not allow that to happen." Attached were photos of Elena meeting with Ethan, two conspirators plotting rebellion, alongside images of federal agents placing surveillance around Marcus's building, and documents indicating indictments were prepared and ready. I stood at the center of a storm, enemies closing in from every direction. That afternoon had been beautiful, transformative, and filled with everything I'd ever imagined intimacy could be. But it also painted a bright red circle around us. Anyone looking in from the outside would see it clearly. Ruby Callahan was no longer a chance witness. She had become Marcus Tretti's most vulnerable weakness. As he slept beside me, his arm draped over my waist in a reflex of protection, the anonymous email appeared on my screen at 3 a.m., a silent alarm bell flashing in the dark. "Warehouse 47, Brooklyn docks tomorrow night. Marcus will walk into a trap built by the very people he trusts. If you care about him, find a way to warn him without revealing your source." Attached were photographs Victor meeting with unfamiliar, brutal-looking men. Elena handing over documents to the same group, her expression as cold as marble. And the last image, Agent Reynolds and her federal team installing surveillance around a warehouse dressed for a gunfight. This was no longer pressure or negotiation. This was orchestration. The kind of betrayal that ends with a body bag. I turned toward Marcus. His voice thick with sleep brushed the air. "You're awake." "I got a message," I said, fighting to steady my voice. "There's an ambush planned at the Brooklyn docks tomorrow night. Multiple factions, people from your own organization." He sat up immediately, the green in his eyes cutting through me, seeing everything I tried to hide. "The source?" he asked. "Can we trust it?" "Anonymous, but there are photos, documents. Ethan's been in contact with the Castellano family. Elena's feeding intel to the feds. They're using a trade negotiation to lure you into a crossfire. No panic, no rage, just that cold focus shift I'd seen in him before, the one that preceded decisive action. "Show me everything." For an hour we combed through each image, every detail. He asked short, precise questions, piecing together a timeline until as dawn broke, the whole pattern of betrayal came into view. "This is intricate," he said, finally almost with admiration. "Victor leaks expansion plans to make Castellano think we're encroaching on their territory. Elena tips off the feds with the place and time. Both sides converge believing they're acting alone. And I walk into the middle," I finish softly. "Exactly. Except now I know it's a trap. And when you know a trap, it's no longer an ambush, it's an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that removes multiple threats at once, and reminds everyone of the price of betrayal." His plan was daring, ruthless, terrifying. He would still go to the warehouse as expected, but early with superior firepower and positioning. The feds and the Castellanos would turn on each other while his men controlled the perimeter. When the smoke cleared, Victor and Elena would stand exposed, the Castellanos neutralized, and Agent Reynolds' investigation buried under charred evidence and fallen officers. "This is madness," I protested. "Too many variables, too many ways this could go wrong." "The only other choice," Marcus replied calmly, "is to let someone else choose the hour of our destruction. Better to fight on ground we choose than die on theirs." "I'm going with you." "No." The word struck like a hammer, final, unyielding. "This isn't a boardroom or a dinner table. People will die tomorrow night. I won't risk you being one of them. You'll need someone watching the feds, coordinating communication, warning you if anything changes. You'll need someone you trust completely in a support position." He looked at me for a long time, torn between the instinct to protect and the logic of survival. "If you're there and something happens, if you're caught or killed, it will destroy me, Clara. Do you understand that? If you die while I hide somewhere safe," I whispered, "it will destroy me just the same." The next night, the docks felt like another world. Shadows stretched long beneath the jaundiced glow of streetlights. The slap of water against the concrete pier echoed like a warning. And in the dense waiting silence, it felt as if every heartbeat belonged to a hunter. The warehouse district was a chessboard, and every piece had been placed by Marcus with the cold precision of a master strategist. His men moved like ghosts circling the perimeter, overlapping their lines of sight, keeping exits clear in case the night turned against them. I sat 3 blocks away in the communications van, headphones pressed to my ears, eyes fixed on the screens showing radio frequencies and flickering feeds from hidden cameras. The federal agents arrived first, Detective Reynolds herself in command, her voice tight with tension over the radio, the strain of relying on intelligence she didn't fully trust. Moments later came the Castellano men, confident, swaggering, certain of victory. They melted into the shadows, poised for the moment they'd close the trap, unaware that every step they took had already been measured, every move accounted for. And then, like actors stepping into a play already written, Ethan appeared. Elena was with him, sharp, beautiful, her eyes lit with the gleam of someone who believed that by morning the world would belong to her. 2 guards followed close behind, loyal not to blood, but to the promise of new power. They entered the warehouse like guests at their own coronation. But revolutions like chess never go the way the traitors imagine. The first gunshot came from nowhere. The Castellano crew, thinking the feds were making a move, opened fire. In seconds, the warehouse became a blaze of chaos. The crack of rifles, the shatter of glass. Reynolds' voice screaming through the radio. Who fired first? Hold your positions, hold. Through the storm, I saw Marcus. A storm himself, contained in human form. He moved through the skeletal steel frames with a grace that defied reason, each shot precise, final, like punctuation on a sentence that could only end one way. His men didn't panic. They fired in rhythm, a symphony of control against the cacophony of panic. And then I saw it, the thing that froze the blood in my veins. Ethan, he'd found his position. A perfect shot. Elena beside him, signaling, calculating, directing, like a conductor guiding death's orchestra. I hit the transmitter. Marcus, he's got a clear line of fire from your 2 o'clock. Elena's guiding him. Copy. Marcus's calm voice came through low and steady. Hold your position. Prepare to extract if things turn. Hold my position. How could I sit still while the man I loved stood framed in his brother's crosshairs? Promises, tactics, fear. All of it splintered. I threw open the van door and ran into the night. The shot rang out, but it didn't take Marcus. It took me. The pain tore through my shoulder, spun me backwards into a wall of shipping containers. My ears rang, light and darkness blurred. Through the haze, I saw Marcus's face transform into something primal. Fury so pure, it chilled me to the bone. Ethan stood frozen. I didn't mean, touch her again, Marcus said, his voice like thunder, and you die. He didn't wait for another word. His gun roared. Ethan fell, eyes wide. Betrayal ended in a heartbeat. Elena ran, but every door had already been locked. Marcus's men were everywhere. The game had ended before it began. By dawn, the air still reeked of gunpowder. The warehouse smoldered with the aftermath of its own destruction. Federal and Castellano forces annihilating each other, Ethan and Elena exposed as the traitors they were. Marcus's empire stood not only intact, but stronger. I, however, lay on a stretcher, white bandages blooming red. The private hospital room smelled of antiseptic and flowers. But all that mattered was Marcus's presence beside me, constant, unwavering. Months had passed since that autumn afternoon in the Willow and Birch Cafe, and now I lay here, my shoulder wrapped, my hand clasped in his. He hadn't let go once. The doctor says you can leave tomorrow, he said softly, his eyes gentle again. 6 weeks, and you'll be fully healed. Home, I murmured. The word felt foreign, like something from another lifetime, a time when safety meant a small apartment and quiet anonymity. Where is home now? His smile was slow, warm, dangerous in its tenderness. Anywhere you want it to be, but I already know my answer. That week, the shadows that had stalked us for months finally began to fade. Elena was stopped at the airport. Her passport still unstamped, her betrayal delivered straight to Marcus's desk. His justice was swift, absolute. There were no second chances for traitors. Detective Reynolds survived, but her career did not. With her key witness gone, her surveillance destroyed, her evidence turned to ash, she was reassigned to Montana, where the most pressing crime was cattle theft. There's something I need to ask you, Marcus said one evening, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. His hand slipped into the pocket of his vest. Slow, deliberate, almost nervous. I held my breath. The velvet box appeared small enough to stop time. When he opened it, The light caught on a diamond circled with emeralds, the same shade as his eyes, set against cool platinum. "Clara Bennett," he said, each word engraving itself into my heart. "You've seen the darkest parts of my world and stayed. You risked your life for me, with a courage most soldiers I've known could only dream of." His voice faltered then, only slightly, but his gaze remained steady, unshakable, as if fate itself had already decided the answer. Tears blurred everything before me as the weight of his words sank into my heart. This wasn't merely a proposal. It was an invitation into a world I'd never dared to imagine. One both shadowed and luminous, where family meant protection, with the same ferocity it meant vengeance. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice quiet, steady, as though the promise had always existed between us, waiting only to be spoken aloud. "Will you give me a lifetime to prove you were right about me?" "Yes." The word escaped as a whisper, small but carrying every silenced hope, every buried dream I'd kept hidden inside. "Yes. Of course. Yes." The ring slid onto my finger as if it had been waiting for this very moment. The diamond and emerald caught the soft amber of late afternoon light, spilling through the hospital window. Marcus's kiss was gentle, careful of my wounds. Yet within it thrummed all the passion and promise that made my heart race ahead of the future. 2 weeks later, I stood in the rose garden behind Marcus's penthouse, the air heavy with perfume and sunlight. The blooms surrounded me like a dream in full color. Around us were familiar faces, people who had once been the inner circle, now redefined as family. It was a small wedding, elegant and quiet in its defiance. 2 people choosing each other against every odd, every danger. Lily flew in from Columbia, her medical school acceptance letter tucked inside her purse like a charm. Now, the anonymous scholarship that had rescued her dreams finally had a face. She hugged Marcus, gratitude softening what had once been suspicion. "I've never seen you so happy," she whispered later during the reception, her gaze fixed on Marcus as he accepted congratulations from men who had proven their loyalty with blood and fire. "He looks at you like you hung the stars yourself." "He's saved me in more ways than I can count," I said, adjusting the family ring that now rested on my hand. The Moretti heirloom, a silent emblem of my place beside him. "And I think I've saved him too." Our vows sounded traditional, but their meaning was anything but. Marcus promised to love and protect me. Yes, but also to honor the strength that had brought us together, never to see me as fragile, even in a world built on danger. And I vowed to stand beside him through every trial, to come to trust his judgment in family matters, and to help him build something better than what generations before us had left behind. Twilight draped itself over Manhattan. We stood alone on the rooftop, the skyline unfurling around us. Endless towers, endless lights, a million lives and dreams we would never fully understand. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked, his arm encircling my waist. "Just one," I said, leaning into his warmth. "I wish we'd met sooner." He smiled, pressing a kiss to my temple. We found each other at the right time. Everything before this was just preparing us for now. Before me, the future opened like a book not yet written, terrifying and thrilling all at once. There would be challenges, rival families who would see our happiness as weakness, law enforcement agencies that would never stop trying to rebuild their case. There would be a delicate balance between the legitimate businesses Marcus was expanding and the shadowed legacy that had built our world. But there would also be love, companionship, the safety that only comes from belonging to someone who would kill to keep you safe. I thought of the woman I'd been 5 months ago, alone, afraid, hiding from a world she believed too dangerous to survive. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, braver, a woman who could walk beside a man powerful enough to shape cities and still hold her ground. I had found my place in Marcus's world. And more than that, I had helped him rediscover the part of himself that could balance strength with mercy. The ring on my hand caught the last light of day, the diamond and emerald scattering tiny rainbows across the rooftop stone. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new challenges, new threats we would face together. But tonight, in the arms of the man who had claimed and cherished every part of me, I finally understood what I had only ever read about in books, that to belong is not to be possessed, but to become 2 halves of something unbreakable,